As we wrap up our discussion of sloth, I want to, do those things that I said I'm going to do. Is sloth located? Can we find it in the Garden of Eden? Does it help us understand what's happening there? What are the goods that it perverts, and how does it alienate us? Well, I think we can find sloth, or at least the seeds, the beginnings of sloth, in the garden when Eve decides to take the easy way of knowing good and evil. By eating the fruit, she can, at least in her head, this is what she's saying, in her heart, by eating the fruit, she can get what will take a lifetime of work. Instead of going out and trying to discover and work hard to find out what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, she doesn't need to do that at all. She can just decide right now to be the one who determines for herself what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. Sloth is almost always, right? It looks at something and says, too demanding, and tries to turn to something else. And the problem, of course, every time is when it turns to this other thing, the other thing never delivers what the too demanding thing can. So sloth always gives us an empty alternative, a disappointing alternative. What is the good thing that sloth perverts? Well, I think we can see that sloth perverts the demands of love, right? Sloth says of the demands of love, it says, too much, too burdensome, and then it settles for this cheap substitute. That's what sloth perverts. Most of us, as I've already said, but it's worth repeating, most of us do think, we sort of know this intuitively, it's kind of built into our nature, that being in loving, intimate relationships with others is at the very least one of, if not the most important part, most meaningful, significant part of our lives. It's not that work is bad or anything like that, but for many of us, right, work is a way of enhancing our love relationships, right? It can serve our love relationships in various ways. So we recognize this, and yet we regularly turn to other things. We regularly reject what is required of deepening those love relationships, deepening our love, and turn to something else. This is super, super sad. How might sloth show up in our lives? What are some of the symptoms, the fruits, the offspring of sloth that we could maybe point out to see if this is something we need to address? Well, here's a few. Busyness. Sometimes the busiest people, the people who never rest, they're always working, they're always tired, they're always on the go. Sometimes this is a manifestation, this is a fruit of a heart that is avoiding the demands of love. They're avoiding relationships at home or elsewhere, and instead turning their attention to busyness. Escapism is often seen as a symptom of sloth, and maybe the most telltale sign of escapism is some type of addiction. Right? So alcoholism, drug addiction, maybe video games or pornography or something along those lines. Maybe instead of those being related to gluttony or lust, it could be that those are actually, for some people at least, signs of sloth. We turn to alcohol. We turn to drugs. We turn to porn. We turn to video games or something like that in order to avoid the requirements of love, the requirements of relationships. So if you experience hopelessness, despair, sometimes suicide ideation might be a symptom of sloth. Now, please keep in mind, when I give these symptoms, I'm not ever saying that if someone experiences suicide ideation, if someone experiences addiction, if someone experiences depression, then it's really all about sloth. That's not what I'm saying. Look, I'm totally on board. I've got no problem admitting that some people might experience depression or some of these other things due to chemical imbalances in the brain, physiological issues. So the point is not to say that those things are never true. The point is to say they're not always true. They're not always true. Sometimes my escapism, my addictive behavior, sometimes your behavior is not just due to some chemical imbalance in your brain, but it's due to an avoidance of the requirements of love. How might we how might we treat sloth? Well, I think there's a couple of different ways. One fascinating way, right, is to really take Sabbath seriously. If we take the Sabbath seriously, then what we'll try to do, what we'll end up having is not just this physical rest. You don't just lay down all day long. No, when you take the Sabbath seriously, what you're attempting to achieve, what the Sabbath is for, is spiritual rest, spiritual quietness. The Sabbath is to tell us that life is not about money. It's not about material possessions. It's not about work. Life is not about video games or about movies and music and all of those things. None of those things are bad. They're all wonderful. I love them all. I do them all. But what the Sabbath does is it says, no, recenter. Recenter. You were made to be in a loving relationship with God. And that is the only place where you will find rest. Think of the words of Jesus. All those who are weary and heavy laden, come to me, and I will give you rest. The Sabbath is all about that. Here's a couple of other ways of thinking about how to deal with sloth, how to treat it. One of my favorite stories is this story, The Ring of Solomon. This comes from Jewish lore, and it goes like this. Solomon is out one day. Remember, King Solomon, richest, wisest man in all the world. He's out one day with some of his attendants, his advisors. He's walking around his kingdom, around the palace, and he notices a shiny object on the ground. He bends over, picks it up. Lo and behold, it's this beautiful ring, but it has nothing on it. It's just a solid, well-crafted, beautiful ring. So he picks it up and takes it with him. He goes back. They're sitting around their advisory table. He looks at the ring. He's hearing all the reports from these people. At the end of the thing, he says, okay, everybody, next time we get together, here's one of the tasks that you have to do. Everyone around this table, you need to come up with a saying that I can get inscribed on the ring that every time I look at it will make me wiser. Every time I look at it will make me wiser. So it has to be short enough, small enough to fit on the ring, and profound enough so that every time I see it, I become wiser. So they come back a week later, and Solomon goes around and says, what you got, what you got, what you got? Everyone sort of looks, they're terrified. If you give the king bad advice, it could be the end of you. So they're terrified of telling him what to inscribe on the ring. Finally, he gets to the last person. The person sort of mumbles under their breath, seemingly speaking to themselves, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. Maybe they're trying to tell themselves, this is going to pass. This is going to pass. You'll get through this. Solomon hears it and he says, oh, wow. That's it. So he gets it inscribed on the ring. And here's the idea. Every time he looks at it, Solomon will be reminded of this. Whatever state that he is in, it will pass. You see, sloth tells us that the depression we're in, the sadness we're in, the loneliness that we're in, it's going to last forever. There's no use in trying to get out of it. There's no use in loving. Sloth says it's going to last forever. Give up. You look at the ring, it says, this too shall pass. Sloth sometimes will tell us this. When you're in a state of ecstasy, your relationships are going so well, it's awesome. Sloth says that's how it should be all the time. That's how it's going to be. And then when your relationship starts taking a dive, when love doesn't seem to be delivering what you want it to deliver, you're in despair. You despair. of love. It doesn't seem worth it anymore. My life was supposed to be going perfectly. Love was supposed to never be this way. And so Sloth says, it's not worth it. I told you, it's not worth it. You look at the ring, and the ring says, this too shall pass. We need to be reminded that these states that we enter into from time to time, states of loneliness, states of sadness, states of depression, states of ecstasy, are not designed for our types of beings. They're not designed to last forever in this life. They too will pass. Do not listen to sloth, which says it's just not worth it. Love is worth it.